I went down to a local museum. It's not a big museum and they don't have their own stuff. They host traveling exhibits, but not famous ones, nothing like King Tut or the Dead Sea Scrolls. They host smaller and lesser known exhibits that travel around. Still pretty interesting. They're not usually crowded and they rarely charge any entrance fees. Sometimes they'll have some interesting lecturers come around, people that have an interesting enough story to tell that gets them enough speaking engagements, but not famous enough to be on TV or become really huge on social media. One guy came through recently that talked about cats. He went around the world on some kind of grant and took pictures of feral cats everywhere. I guess there are plenty of ways to make a living if you can think creatively enough. The one I went to was a history of time, not actual time, but more of a history of time-keeping devices. Clocks are something we always take for granted since they are everywhere. Time is kind of the same. It's one of those things that we think we understand since we use it so much, but in reality, nobody really knows what time is or how it works the way it does. One of the exhibits was an explanation about entropy, the amount of disorder in a system, that overall the amount of disorder will tend to increase. This is the second law of thermodynamics, but it's also closely related to time, or it may even be time. Saying time moves forward is essentially saying entropy will increase. I guess you could say that time moves forward because entropy increases, or maybe entropy increases because time moves forward. They had this one exhibit that explained how easy it is for us humans to misunderstand cause and effect. The most common way is when we see one thing happen and then another thing happen. We assume the first thing caused the second thing. I was reading the explanation while standing next to some other guy, and he said out loud, "Well, that explains a lot." I asked him what he meant, and he explained that he was a therapist, that most problems people have on a psychological level are from a misunderstanding or even a false assumption of cause-effect where none exist. Somebody will do something and somebody else will respond in a certain way, and the first person will assume the second person responded because of something that was wrong with the first person. But in reality, the second person probably doesn't really have any idea of why they responded like that. The problem is that most of us create the idea of who we are on a very deep psychological level by a ton of these cause-effect assumptions which just aren't true. Most of us can get so confused with the thoughts in our own mind. We see things happening around us and we misunderstand this and act in a way that is largely subconscious anyway. You add in other people to the mix and pretty soon most of our behaviors are nearly random. We essentially make up our idea about ourselves from false assumptions about random behaviors. He was saying that you can just as easily define yourself however you want, to choose your own personality, to choose your level of intelligence, to decide who you want to be. I asked what area of therapy he specialized in, and he said it's just like any other business. You just need to follow the money, to focus on where you can make the most money. And for him, this was people who want to get their ex back. He said he's discovered a very powerful way to get your ex back. It requires that you have broken up with them within a month and you share the same social circles. It's based on the idea that we not only communicate subconsciously in a one-on-one situation, but also throughout our social circle. He creates a type of regression hypnosis where his client can go back in time and forget what happened before, where they can rediscover your natural attractive personality, where you can release all fear and anxiety from when before you had relationship problems and behave more attractively. This will resonate through the social circle, and in some way that he doesn't yet understand, your ex will rediscover you on their own. To make sure it works, he has to create genuine amnesia so that you absolutely forget all the pain that happened before. And when he has the clients in a deep state of hypnosis, he installs much more attractive and seductive behavior so that the client will speak more seductively, so that the client will act more romantically, so that the client will feel more confident and feel more comfortable in social situations. It turns out the biggest reason they invented portable clocks was for navigation, that ships sailing across the ocean could easily figure out the latitude by seeing how high the sun was at noon or checking the angles of the stars at night. But longitude requires being able to measure distance, and on the ocean that means knowing time and speed. That's why the portable clock was invented after the British government, back when the sun never set on the British Empire, put up a huge reward to whomever could invent a portable clock. Before they invented clocks, they had to use pendulums, and the pendulum wasn't invented or discovered by Galileo. The story goes that he was bored one day in church, looking at all the different chandeliers that were hanging in the church. He was curious about the relationship between their period and their length, but since this was before clocks were invented, he needed something to compare their period to, so he used his own heartbeat. He would count how many times his heart beat during each swing of the pendulum to calculate the period as a function of their length. I guess that's what scientists do when they're bored in church. This guy took pictures of all these cats around the world, kind of like those guys who go to Africa and hide out taking pictures of lions and tigers, except this guy stayed in hotels, hung out in public parks, and fed feral cats and took their pictures, all funded by some government grant for the arts. I guess there are plenty of ways to make money if you can use your creativity.